Whenever you're ready, you may begin.
Vikings! They're invading! Well, the Norse kids aren't necessarily Vikings. Their ancestors most likely were. And the Vikings, their ancestors, are a huge part of history and led up to what we know now today. There are three main topics of focus for the Vikings that basically sum up their life. First, you have their everyday life on Scandinavia. You have their religion, and you have their seafaring adventures, particularly to the west. Now, as you can imagine, the Viking life was much different from life that we live today. The Vikings ate differently than us. For example, nothing would really grow in Scandinavia that well. You think about it, cold, stale, harsh environment, you're not going to get any crops growing. So the Vikings mostly relied on hunting, such as moose, bears, pheasants, any other animal that would live in Scandinavia. Their clothing, you can imagine, was also very different. They didn't have weavers like we do now. They didn't even use wool. They had mostly animal skins. So when they killed a bear for food, they would also use the bear's skin for clothing. Their housing was different from what is now today, but you can imagine what it would be like. They had log houses that they used from trees, and they also had sod huts. Now these sod huts were used for things such as ironworking, blacksmithing, and other things like that. Now, some of the houses that the Vikings had also had religious complements implemented in them. Religion was also a very big part of Viking life. Now, most people today believe in a monotheistic religion or an atheistic religion, meaning they either believe in one god or no god. The Vikings believed in a polytheistic religion, which is like the Greeks or the Romans. They had their many gods. Now, probably the most famous Viking god, because of Marvel, is Thor. Now, Thor from Norse mythology, Thor from Norse mythology is much different than Thor from the Marvel comics. Sorry. Thor, as you know, was the god of thunder and lightning. So he was the one who the Vikings believed granted safe passages along the sea. Thor was also the peasants' god. Now what I mean by this is the peasants looked up to Thor because Thor stood out for the little guy. He wasn't the big power king, the big power god. He was out for the little guy. He was trying to help the everyday Viking. Odin is the second most well-known Norse god. He is the god of gods, the Zeus of the Norse mythology, if you will. Odin he wasn't Loki, but he was a trickster. He liked to play tricks in the human world. Some of these tricks caused wars between certain Viking tribes in Norse mythology. Loki is the third most known Norse god, also because of the Marvel comics, and no, Loki does not wear a helmet with two big curly horns. But Loki was the trickster god, and he was the one who was more known for his tricks. While Odin still played tricks, Loki was known for them, although his did not cause wars in the human world. Now, do you remember how I said that Thor was the one who would grant safe passage along the seas? Seafaring adventures was a huge part of Viking life. Now, the Vikings went all over the place. They would go across the little bay area in Scandinavia there to Finland. They went down to Great Britain once. But what they're most known for is Greenland and Iceland. Now, Greenland and Iceland were discovered by a Viking known as Eric the Red. And Eric the Red was given this name because he was rather brutal. He was a very vicious Viking, and he did not give mercy. So Eric the Red was he was discovering lands to the west of Scandinavia, and he found Iceland. Now Iceland and Greenland were misnamed, and they were misnamed on purpose, because Eric the Red's thought was, I'll name the island that is the most pleasurable after something that would make it seem like it's not pleasurable. And this would lead Vikings away from that, so that I could keep it all for myself. Well, Greenland over here, this huge island that's covered in ice and rocks and barren land, we'll call that Greenland, so the Vikings will go there and expect something that they won't get. Now, Eric's son, Leif the Vast, Leif Erikson, discovered America. He landed in modern-day Newfoundland and Canada. The Vikings there named it Vinland, and this was actually an appropriate name because they had these huge grapevines. A source from EBSCOhost speaks of about 90 men and women traveling from Scandinavia and landing on the shores of Newfoundland and building sod huts and log cabins. About 3 main large halls, which were used for residential purposes, and then the sod huts, which were used for iron working and ship working and other things such as that. Now, as you can see, the Vikings had a very strange life indeed. It was very strange to what we would think of nowadays as normal. The 3 things that really sum up Viking life that are probably considered most strange nowadays is their everyday life, their religion, and their seafaring adventures. Now, most people don't know that much about Norse mythology, but now you can go around and tell your Norwegian friends that you do.
Thank you very much. Give him a round of applause. Thank you.